Well, everybody's grabbing a snack to eat and getting familiar with each other. Want to kind of just kick off the work session. We have a work session simply because work sessions have a tendency to be a little bit more informal. We're able to have some more question and answer, ask the questions sometimes that we may not be comfortable asking. There's no right or wrong answer. And no matter what gets decided tonight, there's no policy change. We don't vote on anything. There's nothing we can do in here to do any harm to anybody other than better understand the topic of the work session. So the topic tonight is short-term rentals. We discussed this at the very end of last year, and when we walked out of there, staff was asked to, essentially after the conversation, was asked to add a checkbox to our rental agreement so that we could a little bit better regulate, and maybe that's the wrong word, identify who was operating short-term rentals in our community so that we could keep an eye on them, and then also told to just kind of keep an eye on what's going on, whether that's in our community, outside of our community. So here we are, it's March. We are having this conversation again for probably the main reason, in my opinion, is that some things have changed with what other communities have done. We're not here to tell you good or bad. We're not here to tell you we need to regulate more or regulate less. We're just here to tell you and let the council have a conversation about it. So some things have changed in other communities. We've had some feedback from some residents about short-term rentals that I think some members of the governing body have had and have shared with staff and had questions about. And ultimately, I think one of the big conversations that's going on and the question marks that people have is, what does the World Cup mean in terms of short-term rentals? Well, that's going to be in 2026. Well, most of the rentals providers have a 2-year reservation window. So unless we want to have the conversation once perhaps rentals are already in place, if it's the World Cup that is part of what begs the conversation, we've got probably about 90 days to have this conversation before people start potentially renting homes in our community. So again, I'm of the opinion that it's better to have the conversation before that, because right now you've got people that have concerns about quality of life and codes and nuisance and things like that, and single-family home affordability and all valid and great topics, but that's one group of people that share those concerns. If we have this conversation a year from now, and there's people that have already rented out their home for a month, 2 months, 3 months, we're going to have a whole other group of people that want to know why we're having this conversation. So this is about the safest time to have this conversation. Again, staff could care, I shouldn't say we can care less. Staff doesn't really have a dog in the fight. I think that we do a good job regulating them, but again, council voted for this topic to come back as a topic of conversation. So Brian's got a great presentation here to share with you on where we're at, why we're here, what everybody else is doing, some suggestions that we can do if you choose to want to regulate more, or if you choose to regulate less, as well as what we're already doing to regulate short-term rentals. So again, that's why we're here. Take it away, Brian.
Again, short-term rentals, as Chris said, we talked about this last year on the 27th. At that time, we were council directed staff to monitor SDRs, add an SDR checkbox, minimum occupation license, provide quarterly reports. We consider this your quarterly report. We have added a checkbox to our landlord licensing, so we are tracking it through our software system. So we do have even self-reporting, or when we recognize and do use an SDR, we are asking those questions. And then just a little bit of recap. Last month, you all asked us to be back on the upcoming agenda. What are we discussing? So again, short-term rental for this conversation tonight is leasing a single-family dwelling, two-family dwelling, attached dwelling for not more than 28 days, in which the property owner does not occupy the dwelling for the duration of the lease. 28 days took that from, that can be changed. 28 days took that from the state of Kansas when they do transient guest tax. 28 days is the number. 28 days or less, we get transient guest tax. 29 days or more, we do not. So if someone says 29 days or more, we don't get any transient guest tax. So that's why we took that number. That number could definitely change. The other part about it, which the property owner does not occupy the dwelling for the duration of the lease, again, talking generally about whole STRs, i.e., whole house is rented out and the property owner is not there. So that could also mean the situation where perhaps the property owner is like, hey, I got a lake house, I'm going to stay at the lake for a month, I'm going to leave and lease out my house for Airbnb. We would consider that under this definition of short-term rental as well. So kind of keep that in mind as we go through this. Again, most of the stuff you saw back last year. Do we regulate STRs? Yes, we do. I'm here in Merriam. I'll have that here in just a second. Also, where they're located. Chris touched on the World Cup. June, July 2026, World Cup is coming to Kansas City. Airbnb lets property owners open up their reservations 2 years in advance. We think it's appropriate. As Chris mentioned, had this conversation today. We hate to have a conversation a year from now, change the rules on somebody who's come over from Germany to stay here for a month, and we change the rules and suddenly they're not able to stay here. Again, kind of want to make sure because a lot of folks will be making a lot of preparations for the upcoming World Cup. Code complaints, again, we do not get a lot of code complaints on short-term rentals. All the code complaints we get, we follow up. The majority of the complaints we get in short-term rentals are just leaving the trash cans out there. But again, we follow up on all of the code complaints. Too many STRs in one neighborhood. As you remember, the neighborhood that's bordered by Antioch in Johnson Drive had a number, I want to say 6 STRs located within that small area. They have added at least one more since our last conversation. Didn't allow the map to show that. Removes residential dwelling units from the housing inventory. This is one of the comments that we've gotten from a number of different residents, and also we've gone to various workshops and things like that. So, an STR, someone who is in the business of doing STRs, if they are doing an STR, they have taken a house out of the availability that a family can stay there, rent there for long term, or own the property. So they turned it into a house and out. Provides housing on a very much more limited basis. And the little impact on the neighborhood, that kind of goes back to the previous bullet point again. Concerns about the folks that are staying at the STRs, not necessarily that they're being nuisances loud or anything like that. That's not really the complaint we get. It's just the fact that they're there for 3 days and then they're gone. Somebody else comes in during next weekend, they're for 3 days and they're gone. That those folks, while may have some concern for the neighborhood, they definitely aren't integrated and part of the neighborhood fabric is somebody that's there long term. And then unequal competition in existing hotels. Obviously, doing SDR doesn't require near the upfront monetary investment that building a hotel is. And then just want to point out that Merriam does receive guest tax from STR. We get about $30,000 a year. That's not an insignificant amount of money. That is obviously folks who are finding STRs as a viable option and when they want to come and stay in the city of Merriam. So I'm going to go through local regulations. I'm going to try to go through as quickly as I can. A lot of things have changed since November. Staff went to each one of the Johnson County communities. We went through their code books, figured out what they're doing. So I'll be the first to say that try to just get a high level look. So we made this some specific points that each community does. And obviously we didn't talk with each one of these communities. So perhaps rules say one thing, enforcement perhaps a little bit different. So there is going to be some nuances in there. But again, so next to Mission Woods Open Park, no one has specific STR regulations that do have rental licenses. You do want to know, Open Park did implement a nuisance party regulations in response to an incident they had at an STR last year or a couple of years ago. But again, that's just a general nuisance regulation that is not specific on STR. Leewood and Mission Hills, No, they don't allow leases less than 30 days, and they don't allow leases of only a portion of the program, so they eventually do not allow STRs. Fairway, these are the folks that I think are one of the most recent changes. You can see the definition of an STR. Some of the more interesting part of that it has to be a minimum lease of 3 consecutive nights. On-street parking is prohibited. Owner agent may has to live within 50 miles. This is one of the things that shows up on a couple of other ones. No STR within 1,000 feet of existing STR. What's that 1,000 feet? Where folks get that from? You'll see that's other ones. Generally speaking, 1,000 feet is the length of the city park. So I put it in no STR within 1,000 feet of an existing STR. You try to limit it to 1 STR per neighborhood. Again, back to the idea, try to limit the number of the neighborhood, try to limit the overall numbers within the city, but still at the same time give the ability to have STR. Restricted to 8 persons less, can't be used for reception, convenience, parties, and so on. Roland Park, most interesting part of this one of them is property owner certified that the STR is the principal residence, so essentially there's something requiring the property owner to be present during the STR rental. Shawnee, again, somebody who just recently changed their regulations, or added STR regulations. Owner agent within 100 miles of the occupancy of 10 individuals. They also do license. All these communities, they do licensing except for one. What is that? That means it's an administrative process. The only one that doesn't do it as an administrative process is Kansas City, Kansas Unified Government, and they do have a public process in regards to doing it as a special use for conditional use permit. Westwood, again, one of our interesting things they do is send a courtesy notice to the adjoining property owners. That's just simply a notice that maybe I'll have an STR. Westwood Hill, flat out prohibits them. UG, as I mentioned earlier, so now I'm outside of Johnson County. They do a special use permit. They also do 1 STR per city block. KC Mo, again, license 1 per 1,000 feet. And in North Kansas City, no whole home STR allowed in single family dwelling district. Again, so essentially they have restricted allowing STRs as a whole within the single family area. So how many do we have STRs in Merriam right now? We're tracking about 18. We are tracking 18 of them. I will say we do a pretty good job of finding them. We are on Airbnb. If anybody gets on there, you don't know where those properties are until you actually book them. But our code officers have been through Merriam pretty good. So if there's a picture of the house, so we should give away trade secrets here. But if there's a picture of the house there on the listing, we probably know it and probably can find it. So I think we do a pretty good job of finding it. So, and again, the 18 that is now in our tracking system, folks have the option and the ability to check mark that it is an STR on their landlord licensing application. For a little bit of context, the City of Merriam has about 3,200 single-family dwellings. Approximately 500 of those are rental dwellings. So when you do the math, less than, just a little bit more than 1/2 of 1% of Merriam single-family homes are STRs. So again, 18 is what we're tracking right now. That could be 17 right now, so maybe dropped out. It could be 20. So we could have it. So that number fluctuates. Will fluctuate quite a bit at all times. So here's the locations of them. This is the neighborhood area that previously I think had 6. Now has 7. There's another one there now. As you can see, there's 3 right here. So what are our current STR regulations for the city? Well, we don't have any specific STR regulations, but we do treat them as residential rental property, so that be a landlord licensing for it. We do an interior inspection every 2 years. That's, again, I think more than what all the other communities I just listed do. So we do interior every 2 years. We get inside a rental unit, whether it be an STR or a regular rental unit. The exception would be apartment units that we do just do a percentage of the units for that. We do regular exterior inspections. We have 2 code officers, one who's dedicated to rental licensing, and then we also have a service manager, all of them are out in the community doing patrols, checking out the conditions. Dwelling unit must meet the International Property Maintenance Code, the city code. That's the standard by which we inspect these units. Excessive noise is prohibited, so the city of Merriam, we do have noise ordinances. It's within our code currently right now. And then the last part, Alan, folks probably didn't, Councilman Mayor and I are aware that the city council can revoke occupational licenses. So it includes only one license. So there actually is a process within your code that tells, maps out and describes how you, as a council, can revoke an occupational license. So you do have the ability to do landlords and any other occupational license. So kind of looking at what other folks have done, kind of looking at, again, balancing the idea of giving folks options for staying in Merriam, giving property owners options for how to perhaps have an SDR, but still balancing that with the desire to keep the neighborhoods, limit the number within neighborhoods, and limit the overall number within the city of Merriam. And then also look at just what regulations can be. So a lot of those things that I showed you previously, I do have questions about communities actually being able to enforce those regulations. So with that in mind, these are some of the ideas, some of the thoughts that we had in regards to doing STR regulations for the city. So having an additional license in addition to only one occupational license, an additional STR license. So if you're going to run a short-term rental, under this proposal, you can have two licenses. You have a regular landlord license and a short-term rental license. Proposed license fee is $50. That may be too much, too less. That's just kind of a starting point. The landlord license, occupational license, is $90, which is a year-long license, annual license that runs from January 1st to December 31st. And then the other one, the last one is can't be within 1,000 feet of an STR that existed prior to July 1st, 2024. July 1st was the number we picked. It can be a different number, but the reason for that is exactly what I just did point out was give folks the opportunity for STRs to get in and get the license. Yes.
Are those license fees, are they per property or per operator?
They're per property. So if you are, and this is not for STRs, but just for landlord licensing, if you're a landlord, you have 4 single family homes, you have 4 licenses at $90 apiece. So what would this look like if a 1,000-foot buffer was implemented on the STRs with that map I just showed you just a second ago? Again, we measured 1,000 feet from the point, from the property line to property line at the closest point. That's what the properties are red. You all can't maybe look up to see, but so the STRs are in green dots. The 1,000-foot buffers in gray. Then behind the gray go red parcels. So those are properties that are either single family or duplex parcels. Those parcels, if you could implement a 1,000-foot buffer, would not be able to have an STR. And just that, let me get the number here so I'll give it to you correctly. I was also highly interested in how the numbers on that. So there are approximately 1,600 red parcels that are red. So those are parcels that will not be able to do an STR going forward. And we have approximately 3,300 single-family duplex parcels in there. So essentially half of the single-family residential parcels in Merriam are within the red right there. So obviously this would change, tomorrow, again, if you implement a 1,000-foot, tomorrow that dot went away, all these parcels will no longer be red, and so somebody else can pull in an SDR. So if we did a 1,000-foot buffer, we'd obviously keep the map pretty live, we constantly keep updating it on a regular basis. So,
is it property line to property line or building to building?
Property line to property line. So that is my presentation on SDRs. I'd be happy to answer questions, facilitate conversation. So,
my question is anything we're proposing with staff is proposing to us, yes, would be proposed.
So no one has done anything different if there's an Edelweiss-like property where it's not single family? They haven't said, if it's not a single family zoning, it's a multifamily zoning, then we wouldn't have 1,000, maybe have a 500, maybe have something else.
I've not seen anything like that. Everybody that has put a buffer that I've seen in the KC Metro is 1,000 foot, or the KCK block. And I did not go through KC. They have a really long definition of how they define a city block. It's very complicated. So 1,000 foot buffer is definitely more straightforward and more easier to implement. But everybody needs to, if they have a buffer, it's 1,000 foot.
So if one of them showed up in Edelweiss, then that would be it, right? Almost.
Right, and that's back to kind of the neighborhood conversation. Things we've had and conversations that we've had with residents and interested individuals is, it's a neighborhood thing. And that's
frustrations behind city streets, looking all of them.
You need to talk about something.
Our HOA
Doesn't allow what? Okay.
I would say the 1,000 foot buffer,
restrictions say you can't do it.
the 1,000 foot buffer versus the city block prevents large scale businesses, so developers or companies or organized LLCs from purchasing multiple houses and flipping them all on, like a single street down a street instead of, so that helps with regulating the market.
What about, like, say Drake can't fill all their units and they want to furnish and lease them a short-term rental? With the same 1,000 foot buffer, is there anything about X number of units in a multi-family?
So back to our definition, this definition isn't apartments. This is
It's only single family.
This is single family duplex and attached housing.
So, like triplexes.
Apartment.
Correct. And the idea, I think, is a couple. One, just simply the management of tracking and things like that. And then two, the thought process, part of it is a little bit more transitory to begin with. So, so that's why, most communities look at single family.
To me, that we had the other slide, it said residential rental. And my thought has changed on this since our last discussion. But I don't see a short-term rental as a residential rental. So if you buy into a neighborhood that is single-family residential, you expect to have single-family residential as neighbors. And conversations I've had with people, that cluster up there is a problem because those neighborhoods they're not neighborhoods anymore. There's empty houses everywhere. How do you have a neighborhood when you've got all this empty houses? So, I think that that's a bit bigger buffer is reasonable.
Yeah, I think the other way to think about it is, I think it's an unnecessary regulation. I'm just curious what problem we're trying to solve. Is it housing stock availability? Is it parking on the street? Is it parties? Like, what problem are we trying to solve by putting restrictions on children rentals?
I think it's the issue of the neighborhood that we're trying to have in our community, the neighborhoods that we're trying to have. That it's single family residential. And we're running basically lodging businesses. And if we're gonna run lodging businesses, then I'm not sure that, those licenses, KCK has a special use permit. What other businesses can you run in a residential neighborhood without getting a special use permit? It impacts your neighbors.
Yeah, let's be clear, we do have home occupations, so folks do have a variety of businesses that we're not allowed. So we do have home occupational process.
I'm intrigued by the owner agent living within 50 miles of property that Fairway has. Because to Bruce's point, Libby's point, it seems like some of these houses are being bought by people that don't live anywhere near our community. Probably because of things like the World Cup coming up and things like this. But, there's houses in Highmore that have went up for sale, they've been bought within like 3 days. So it's clear that we have a housing stock issue, so that's my personal, what I've heard from Ward 4 residents is a housing stock issue where we're taking homes away from, starter homes specifically away from families with an accessible price point for a lot of families. And so, that's my personal, kind of thought process. So the older age living within 50 miles of the property, I think that's interesting, but I don't know if that seems fair to everyone. I guess,
So I will tell you that most likely folks do that, and if they're outside of the 50-mile buffer, they get a third-party company that's actually there. Yeah, management company. And we deal with those folks on a regular basis. So yeah, they would likely say they live in Denver, Colorado. They hire management companies within 50 miles.
Couple of things that, I come to mind, some of you guys have. I think anything that we put in place, we need to make sure that we can enforce it. And I noticed with someone did off-street parking, that you can't park on-street parking, it's the off-street parking. I don't know, what your neighbor's got friends over at their party, it's not an SDR, how do we regulate something like that? That would be one concern. I did also receive a complaint about an SDR in this neighborhood and stuff, that they having parties, so they're not related to SDR either. But the people are parking in front of our trash cans, and so they can't come and pick up our trash. And I don't know if that's not obviously one thing I would break that, but I would probably be angry if every week my trash got missed because I had to park in front of my trash can. Trash. So we might see more. I've only heard from one person on this problem, but maybe their trash is on Friday. That's what's getting rid of it. So I don't know where the case is. And when takers other than their trash is getting missed because people, I guess they are talking about things.
I think Jacob had a valuable point about just regulation in general. What behaviors? So here's what we, again, go back to what we regulate. I mean, we don't allow, whether you're a short-term rental or a resident, we got to know what it is. If you're outside and you're partying, we already regulate that. If the garbage is thrown in the yard, we regulate that. Parking, we don't regulate in that way. So if we wanted to regulate parking in that way, I think to your initial point, we'd have to figure out how would we regulate parking. So I guess maybe we should establish, I think, Bruce, what I'm hearing is your regulation is the character of the neighborhood.
Integrity of the residential community.
What it means to live there and what I expect when I have already lived there or when I
buy property in a residential community, I expect a residential community.
So your purpose for regulating would be to achieve that. Now, what behaviors would we be regulating? Just simply no STRs because people live in.
In the state of reasonableness, you have one every 1,000 feet, probably continue to be a residential neighborhood. But when you have them lined up, and whatever percent of your houses in the city 8 feet, that's not a neighborhood. That's not neighbors you get to know. Like the integrity of the residential neighborhood. It's very intangible.
I agree, but I think if that's the point, that we should just outlaw short-term rentals altogether. To me, the 1,000 foot is a first-to-market monopoly that we granted for all of those properties.
I can support that.
I mean, that's to me. It just goes back to what are we really trying to regulate, or what problem are we really trying to solve? And if it's the character of our neighborhoods, and we don't want transient guests in our residential neighborhoods, then we should just ban them outright.
To be honest, I've had, one of my neighbors was attempting to have an SDR for a little while, it's not anymore. But I've had less complaints from those renters than I have from someone renters. So I do see your point, but I also think that the behavior of people that would be renting STRs are not necessarily that thing.
I think that's a great point. Like, the assumption that someone is staying in an STR doesn't mean that that is a negative thing. It also means that they're bringing transient guest tax to our city. It also means that they're coming to our city for some reason. And the 1,000-foot buffer is tricky because I also agree that it's kind of like, well, I have this great opportunity, but now I can't do anything because what's his face who lives in Florida hired somebody to have, like run this thing. But I don't have a better solution, so I don't know. What else to say to this. And I have sympathy for the eastern side of the city where this is becoming more of an issue. But it's not as big of an issue in my ward, and so I'm kind of looking to you guys for more input, because, I don't have the feedback that you do. So I'm not gonna speculate and like say anecdotal things about people who rent STRs and all this stuff. I know that if a lot of corporations buy up homes, it can affect housing stock and prices. I know that if you enforce minimums, like night minimums, sometimes that can be helpful, but I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that like I know exactly the issues that you're dealing with in Ward 4 versus Ward 2, where we maybe have perhaps one.
I'm not opposed to short-term rentals. I've stayed in them, but I had a question that I don't think.
You haven't stayed on an Airbnb before, yeah.
I have a question that I don't think anyone's prepared to answer at this point, but
Oh no, I was just saying like,
I think
short-term
you're
rental
probably
before,
all
right?
of us have stayed in them, but
yeah,
we're not sure. Yes,
right. Yeah, that's why we're all here. My question is, one thing that makes a neighborhood feel like a neighborhood and a neighborhood safe is knowing your neighbors. So you have a cluster of houses that are unoccupied for multiple periods throughout the year. Does that, and then also occupied by short-term renters, do we know how that affects people calling the police because of unknown cars, unfamiliar people? How is it affecting our police resources? Are they being called to investigate these houses more often than our regular?
So when we report back in November, I didn't mention it here, we did have that police department run some numbers since we looked at 2020 on specific addresses, and there was no, the number of calls for those homes was definitely, it was nothing different than normal single-family home. It was not a higher level of enforcement issues or anything like that. So it was the same level as the normal single-family.
I think when it comes to short-term rentals, at least from my perspective, again, I think this is a good conversation. I think it kind of begs the question of why we have the conversation, because it's important to have a conversation. And I think the reason that it's important to have the conversation and whatever we do or choose not to do at the conclusion of the conversation is that I think what I'm hearing is that what we want to protect, well, there's two camps of thought about short-term rentals. There is the camp of it doesn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. I don't know my neighbors. I don't. Things are changing, right? There's this thing that I can't really put my finger on, but I know that it exists. I feel it, and it means something to me, and I want it somehow regulated. Then there's another camp, and I couldn't tell you if it's 50-50. Maybe Brian could help us. There's another camp that have had some sort of adverse experience, meaning, hey, there was kids out throwing up in the yard at 1:30 in the morning. Or they couldn't get my trash cans and my trash overflowed because they didn't come back until next week to pick it up. I think when you look at those two groups, if we can group it in those two groups, I think the group, the latter, we have regulations already in place to deal with those things. But what I'm hearing is it's that thing that we don't have regulations in place that's meaningful. It's community, right? It's the things that make us who we are and make Merriam what it is and make it just right. But I think it's elusive to figure out what exactly is the recipe for SDRs to make things just right.
Well, and I will say, I have personal perspective as someone who runs a short-term rental in Miami. And they're a local, like, we do it through a management company because it's all the way through Canada, so like clearly 50 miles away. But there are local regulations and, you know, like all kinds of DNR, like Department of Natural Resources and things we have to follow. Like, we pay $1,000 to build a bear box every year to make sure a bear doesn't destroy the trash. Like, we make, you know, like, we paint specific colors for birds. Like, we, you know, like all those kinds of things. Like, those are just things that are already regulations that we have to follow. So if the laws are already existing and we are to enforce them, then everybody's covered by that anyway. So like that, you don't need to add regulation for the sake of having it.
Well, I would agree, we don't need to add it for the sake of adding it. I think more
In
from
the
a
terms
staff.
of like, we already do that, we already have lawyers.
Yeah, from a staff perspective, I think, how can we regulate community, right? I mean, that's really maybe what the larger conversation is how do we, is there a way that we can regulate being a good neighbor when being a good neighbor might be a 3-day thing, right? I mean, because if we are okay with the short-term rentals, then really what we want is people to recognize the privilege of us allowing them and to treat the neighborhood with respect like a property owner would. Would that be an accurate statement? And so the question, I guess, then becomes is how do you regulate being a good neighbor for 2 days at a time? I don't have an answer to it, but one of the things that we've discussed, I think, is we could license short-term rentals. And in licensing short-term rentals, I would submit that it'd be $500, not $50.
I would say $50 is such a low entry point.
Because I
Make
think,
it more of a barrier.
yeah, 500 needs to be skin in the game. I think you operate on some sort of 3 strikes, you're out, because there will be situations where you have people that, I mean, if they know that it's just one complaint and these people lose their license, I'm not saying we don't have good permanent residents, but that's a pretty easy way to just eliminate people from who are trying to use their personal property for a business. So I think it doesn't have to be 3 strikes, right? 2 strikes, whatever it is, but I think that might need to be part of it. And part of it might be that, hey, you've got to, I think we brought up at the last one, maybe we have materials that you have to have in your Airbnb that says, hey, this is a privilege for you to be here. Please respect that this is a residential neighborhood. Quiet hours are at 10 o'clock. The trash day here is fill in the blank, have your crap out of the way, or whatever it is.
It's easy to see all of it.
I was gonna say something when you were talking about trash cans, but I was like, it's not
Unless it's Monday.
It's not cutting a law, we're not doing that.
And so it's possible that is the way that you regulate neighborly behavior, but I don't know that we can regulate it by no parking on the streets or noise or 2 or 3 nights, because I don't know how are we going to knock on the door at 1 o'clock in the morning and figure out how many people are in each room, and you rented it for 3 nights and it's Sunday, where's your tenant at? I mean, I don't know that we can regulate those things, but we certainly could at least give it a fighting chance that our voice exists in that rental unit.
Right.
Our voice, and not just our voice, but we talk about inviting people into our community. We have packets that you give out to new residents. We have packets that we create that are very similar for businesses. We could create those, and I was talking to Brian earlier, we also could probably in a weird way, regulate how often some of these things are being used by requiring that one of those packets be in every rental you make. And we can start to go, wow, man, they must be rocking and rolling, because this is the 10th one they've got in the last 2 months. And it would actually help us, because we won't know that. Like, we just don't have a way to regulate. We might know that you're an STR, but I don't know if you've had 8 rentals. I don't know if you rented on a Tuesday night, a Sunday night. But if we require something like that, we can track it, and then at least we have a little bit more better data to decide, do we want to change things? Do we need more of an initiative? Again, that's if we want to try to regulate neighborliness, which is, I don't exactly know how to do that when we're not a neighbor or property. Or you ban them all, but unless.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing on the fee we charge. So whenever we are charging regulatory inspection fees, things like that, it's supposed to be representative of our true cost of regulating. So, increasing the cost because you're trying to make sure that the property owner's got more skin.
Can we inspect them every year?
We can't surcharge it.
Yeah. So and maybe you can justify it, but if you could say, hey, there are more calls for service from the police department associated with it, you inspected it more, if there was more regulatory activity, but it is supposed to be representative of our true cost of administrative programs.
So maybe not $500, but more than 50 probably, certainly, we could get away with that. Yeah. So I mean, that would be one thing that we could try to look into and see if that's, but again, let's not forget, we already do regulate some of these behaviors. A lot of the behaviors that people have that are experiential, we regulate those things. I mean, like, we don't allow anybody to party outside at 1 o'clock in the morning. We don't care how long you've been here, like, you gotta go in the house or you gotta go home, right? So a lot of those behaviors we already regulate. So again, what are we trying to regulate? That wasn't the solution. I'm just throwing stuff out there trying to synthesize all the things I'm hearing. If anybody thinks any of this
Just
is
look at this map, I can only see about 5 more STRs.
Right, but let's also remember though, that it's gonna be fluid.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fluid. I mean, somebody could call tomorrow and say, I'm not getting an SDR, but mine won't exchange.
Yeah, they cost $300. I'm not doing it. Right.
Right,
Or whatever we did.
right. Or someone could call up and say, hey, I'm putting my SDR out, sold. Because an SDR, just like a landlord license, there's 2 things so it goes with the property and the person who gets the license. If either one of those 2 things change, the license is gone. So they're definitely, if you implement a rule of licensing the STRs, it is highly likely that map is going to be very fluid over time. Because folks will sell the property, no longer as an STR. So you understand what I'm saying? So do not think those dots are set in stone.
And it's very fluid.
And they'd have to renew every year. It'd be just like.
Right, they have to renew it every year.
So I was just doing some VRBO Airbnb searches and I found like 4 that aren't on there that are partial home.
Correct.
So like private room or like?
Yeah, like where it's like someone lives upstairs and they rent out their basement, or they rent out an EDU or their backyard or something like that.
We're not, that is not something discovered.
Okay, that's with my
Yeah, this is not covered.
This is like a single structure.
If
not
when the
partial,
property
it's
owner is
not-
not there.
No,
Let's
property.
say not-
That's the key part.
That's the key part. But they're leaving to let someone occupy.
Right. So like this, what I'm finding, like my neighbor does this, they like rent out a room in their house, and like I really don't care if it's not me, but I just was curious. I didn't think that was covered in this. I just wanted to know. Okay.
So always keep back in mind is the key part of the property owner's not present there.
Right.
We talked about the bad actor, whether it's 3 strikes, whatever, are there legal implications there that we need to be considering? Because it feels like that might regulate the behavior. If I, as the owner, am gonna lose the ability to rent the property because my tenants aren't towing the mark.
Yeah, was it Fairway that
Fairway did not. Nobody has the 3 strikes and you're out. What Fairway has, what Fairway has is, and I have real misgivings or real concerns about what Fairway does. What Fairway does is, when you want to do an SDR license, you send out notices to all the neighbors, and if you get 3 neighbors that say, I don't want that SDR, it goes to planning commission.
That's real.
Now, why you will put your planning commission in that spot,
Yeah.
I do not know. That is not a spot anybody wants to be in any kind of committee or board. So that is not, so the streets, so I think what Chris was talking about was something along the lines of, if over a year period, an SDR had 3 verifiable violations, police, code, whatever, then this is what we have to work through, this is probably the part that we need to work through is it an immediate revocation, does it go to the city council?
I don't want it to be an annual review.
That'll be the actual issue of it is 3 strikes, then what happens?
Well, like,
Is it-
those are things that we already have codes and policies for, that we already, I don't know, like, that's not the reason to make regulations for SDRs to meet. Like, to me, it's all
If
about,
we would pull the license, they wouldn't be able to list the property anymore.
because they have one person listed there, 3 people listed there, it's not, like, that's, I don't like that at all. Like, that's not the way to.
Well, it could be 3 different renters, I'm not trying to dictate that.
Well, like, you
Just
could
saying.
have like 3 different people that like come to domain ops and cause problems, and then we close domain ops. Like, I'm being like really devil's advocate
Well,
here.
but I would
like,
say, as the owner, I need to make it very clear to my tenants, people are renting from me, that they need to respect the neighborhood.
Right, I mean, I think it would depend on what your threshold is municipal court citations or excessive noise, rising to that level, or is it just neighbor complaints? If it's just neighbor complaints, no matter what.
If it's just neighbor complaints, they're gonna get 3
Right.
neighbor complaints right
No
off
matter
the
what
bat.
Or
you-
you have those houses and people that own their houses. Like,
No matter what you
right,
set,
like, you can't keep that from this, right?
no matter what you set the threshold at, you would have to have somewhat of a due process for the appeal, where it would just be Brian and pro decision. That's what I would.
Didn't you have on one of your slides that you can revoke landlord licenses?
You can revoke any occupational
So
license.
what-
There's actually, sorry, let me finish. I just want to make sure you're clear. It's actually a pretty good process in there. It's a pretty detailed process. It is for cause. You have to give due process to the property, to the licensee, the person with the license. But there's actually a process in there. So it's with all occupational licenses to include a learning license. But yeah, it's a well-defined process that again gives the person who has the license the opportunity to contest in front of you all. So essentially, you as a city council would be a judge and jury.
But how do they get served? What happens?
Usually there would be like a misviolation.
Yeah, it's a little.
I mean, do we sound like the person that we get enough complaints that it's
Correct. I believe that's
Isn't that how most of it's done?
I know, but
But I mean,
versus
the staff
free
comes
strikes
to
or-
us.
Yeah,
Staff comes to us.
Well, 3 strikes is just, I mean, it's a concept. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not 3 strikes.
I like the idea of like codifying, what constitutes enough violations so that the landlords know. So those are, that's all that I mentioned.
So when Brian's looking, so let's go through a couple of the things that we've heard. Do we want a buffer? Whether it's 1,000 foot or 100 foot, 2 foot, 1,000,000 foot,
Yeah,
do we want a buffer?
I think we,
I feel sorry.
I think you have to deny it.
You're
Oh,
Our word.
To be clear, I mean, I think we have to grandfather in what's already there.
100%.
So it just won't get worse. I don't know that it's gonna get
No, I
better.
understand that completely, and I just think that those neighbors are the ones that hear from the most,
Sure.
and also some of the more established neighborhood associations in our ward too, are the ones that are like curious and concerned about it.
I think some kind of buffer ensures that like your housing stock, like within a specific concentrated block or something, doesn't just go to, you know, or yeah, whatever.
Because a lot of those homes are like the ones that are like more accessible price point, they're.
And those are the ones that are gonna snap up and rent.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I already like feel like we have a mission of keeping people in Merriam, and that's another story, like another conversation about housing, but like, you know, we already have a mission of people staying in Merriam because our houses are smaller, old, and all the reasons that people want to leave, but like, you know, we should get more people to be able to buy houses here.
And to be devil's advocate on that point, not to belabor any of this, but people that come in and buy property, fix it up and turn it into short-term rentals are addressing that very concern to their credit, assuming they're fixing it up.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you're just buying it, it's still a rabbit, but I mean.
So they're also still buying a home that like a small family can live in. And add to our tax base and add to our, you know, community of elementary school or, you know, even just, you know, younger
It
families.
takes affordable housing stock.
Yeah, exactly.
So a buffer, some sort of
Let's make
buffer,
the buffer nice.
it seems there's at least some sort of agreement that if we were gonna do this, a buffer would be something that we like, or believe is agreeable.
I mean, it's
Is-
a double-edged sword, but I think it needs to happen.
Is it 1,000 foot? I mean, that's what we're proposing here. It certainly could be less, but you can see about the size of that. I mean, it's about the size of the block. That's kind of where, that's again, trying to maintain the integrity of a neighborhood, or at least a block.
Is 1,000 foot the limit of a block, so really is it 1,000 foot radius or diameter?
Radius, so yes, you are correct, so it's gonna make a block is length, but it also goes this way, so, it is a radius, it is not just, again,
So it's really 2 blocks.
right, so if you go, just say, you know, I got a north-south block, that's gonna cover the block, and then the east-west is definitely outside. And then just real quick, revocation proceedings may be initiated by majority vote of the city council. Revocation, there's a list of reasons for revocation. One of them is a violation of provisions of code. So yeah, city council majority vote can begin the revocation
And that's
process.
initiated by the council, or by staff, or by resident.
It would be initiated, it says revocation initiated by the majority vote of council.
So it would have to be a topic put on the agenda.
Right.
And the council, so it would have to be something where you say, hey, the property at 123 Sesame Street, we need to talk about, we're having some issues there. And
And
then,
that would be the staff that brings it to the attention of the council.
yeah, we would, but I mean, I would assume that if it's to that point, somebody's probably brought it to your attention anyway, right? I mean, it's,
Hopefully.
yeah, I mean, you know, but yes, we would, yeah, the complaints I get is, you're well aware, I usually forward to you if it's in your ward. Anytime I hear from a resident, I will respond to them and put you on it, as well as the mayor, so everybody knows that, hey, this is somebody in your ward, this is what they're asking, this is the situation, and here's what I told about whatever the topic is. So, okay, so 1,000 foot buffer, permitting, do we like the idea of a permit, and at least having some level of skin in the permit in terms of not $50? Whatever that number is, we could certainly quantify.
Yeah, and I think that's also just to be aware and to keep track of where they are too, right?
It would help,
Yeah.
yeah, it would help. Again, the whole idea of the packet, I mean, I like that idea because one, it can put, hey, shop here, do this, I mean, we would have the visitors bureau put it together, but also it puts something in there that says, this is a privilege, you're in a neighborhood, we can make sure that our message is conveyed. We're not trusting just the owner to say, hey man, don't act like clowns because it's a residential neighborhood. We can craft the message and make sure the message is clear. So we could also do that in regulating if we did a permit.
On our regular rentals, we have every 2-year inside inspection.
Right.
Would it be appropriate to have more inspections of these?
Staff time, that 2 years is a staff time.
Well, it would be paid for by this, whatever fee.
It's not gonna pay for another, not gonna pay
It'll
for
be
another
good
FTE. That's another FTE.
Or
What would you
these
be wanting to
18
look for?
units,
Just that,
18 units?
So,
Just short-term rentals would get additional inspections. They're paying additional fees, we should get something for it.
so why would we inspect
Yeah, what
those
do you want
different,
us to
why would
look
we
for?
inspect those differently than I would any other resident?
Well, we're gonna have to require them to have materials we're gonna hand out. They actually have those inside.
You also have more, your leases are like a year for a regular rental, you have potentially 52 different rentals, if you're thinking of 52 weekends, right, for a short. I'm being double advocate, it's not even that low.
Because, now you're getting into the staff time.
No, I
It's paid for by the regulation.
I will not be able to get another FTE with whatever you
Well,
charge
you
for
could
the.
get
for
2
the
hours of
19.
overtime to do this. If we're charging an extra $100,
if we renew the license, we would go inspect annually. It's an annual license, we would go annually, part of the license, just go.
So understand, setting up an inspection is just not, the inspector calling the person and saying, hey, I wanna come inspect. It is an intense amount of staff time to get into.
I agree. I agree it will take staff time. But the point over here was if we're gonna charge more money, it needs to reflect the actual cost.
So you would say
So
to charge enough money
If
for
there's a reason to do more
rentals,
inspections,
annual inspection.
if there's a reason to do more inspections, it can be paid for by the regular, by the.
So
Additional
so you would argue that we would need to charge.
Do we need to do more inspections is my question.
From a staff standpoint,
Not can we, should we?
from a staff standpoint, we don't see why there would be a difference on.
You don't think doing more inspections would lead to a different
Better out.
Because the market, I mean, once you get a bad review on an Airbnb because it's not up to par.
Again, because we inspect for life safety, we're not inspecting we're not, so we can inspect on an Airbnb and say, yeah, looks great, you can get a horrible review.
How steep can we make the fine for non-compliance for people who don't get their license in a timely manner? I'm not like trying to find out of business, but I've also been in jurisdictions where the fine is barely more than the fee to begin with, so there's no.
Meaning,
There's
we
no
find
way.
that we have a licensing requirement and we find somebody on Airbnb and we go, you don't have a license.
Yes.
You have 30 days or we will fine you X.
I think our standard fine is, I want to say it's $500, and then it's $500 for each violation. So it can be,
That's the maximum we can charge.
It's 500.
Now, you know, every day that they violate it, we can do that.
We can't make it like 5 times the amount of the initial license.
Well, $500
I know, but like, why, the $500 just seems like a weird.
It's
That's statutory, that's statutory.
Not to be the devil, that I have properties myself. Look at it once, and then, use. I could, elect, if I did, if I had none of my, I could just say, hey, I'm gonna make my house a short-term rental. Never made it a short-term rental. I'll figure it out. There's none of my neighborhood.
You absolutely could.
I could do that.
understand we will inspect.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, right.
We will inspect it. If you have violations, you will have to,
That's actually interesting, Doug. If I have a rental that I plan on being a regular long-term rental, but I was willing to pay a short-term rental fee, would we know or care that they never rented it as a short-term rental, they just put somebody in there in a 12-month lease?
they're just paying.
So yes, I can so you could do that to protect the integrity of the neighborhood if that's was your goal. And you have to know 2 houses next to each other. Which
So if you want to keep it while you're
so I guess back, question, again,
Do we want to regulate these more than we are? If we are, it sounds like 1,000 foot, it sounds like we need to do some sort of licensing. Perhaps with some material in there that, again, promotes Merriam, but also says, you know, in your P&Q, behave yourself, all those good things. Is there anything in addition to that that we feel would help or we need to? And then I think we need to ask the question, what is the risk of doing that versus the risk of doing nothing? Right? Like if we just maintain the status quo and walk out of here right now, does it matter? What's the alternative? And I guess the other thing is do we care with this 2-year window that's going to open up in June for the World Cup? Because I think what we need to make sure that we're clear on is that if it is what everyone says it's going to be, they're going to be all over the place, and we're not going to be able to. We're not going to be able to regulate them, and we're not going to know they're there until they're there, right? I mean, because once, especially if that's the whole point. Like if my business is not going to be a regular short-term rental, it's simply to cash in on the World Cup, then that's going to be, that's going to be a fire and forget. That's going to be a pop-up type of thing where it's, unless we happen to see it online, it's going to come online, somebody's going to rent it, and then we're never going to know until somebody goes, hey, who are the Germans?
And then the other side of that argument is, do we deny the citizens of Merriam that opportunity?
Well, deny them the opportunity to sell their house, to rent their house. Yeah, well, correct. And so that I think that's the point of right now. What you're generally hearing, at least from what I'm seeing and what I'm receiving from residents, are people that don't want them. Right? I'm not receiving emails from people saying, I think short-term rentals are a great idea. Let's make sure we keep doing them. Right? So, but if we restrict, or if we decide to restrict even further, once we have rented some of them, we being Merriam homeowners or whoever it is that owns them, you've got a whole other group of people now that you're going to start hearing from. Right? Right now you have one group of people. At some point in time, you might have 2 groups of people, and now so the status quo is always the status quo.
All of a sudden, you've taken something away from a lot of people.
You've taken something that's prospective at best, right?
That's kind of how I feel when I look at this. And like I think about my plans to if I rented for the World Cup.
Both sides too.
That's what I was thinking. Like,
We're taking away the ability of a lot of people in the city
to make a lot of money
to rent their house for.
And again, that is talk amongst yourselves.
I don't care about that at all. I care about the long term. So it's like, I don't care if someone's renting their house out for a month or a World Cup. Like, personally, I think that's what I've been hearing from I could be wrong, but that's what I think I'm hearing from Workforce residents is that like it's more about the fabric of it in the long term. It's not about 2 months in 2026. I don't think most of it are thinking that far yet. Personally.
So even when you say, and what about during this one, it's a month, how long is?
The World Cup's probably like 2 months.
It's 5
months.
months.
June and July.
Yeah. Even if you're giving up the opportunity to go visit your mom and rent out your house for a month, they still want to limit.
Oh no, I said I don't.
SDRs.
Like, I think that's really bad. That's fine. I don't think that's a big deal to do that for those 2 months or whatever. I think it's the long term. It's not the like Florida and something. I think like a lot of people are freaked out about the World Cup.
But-
I don't care.
But if we put these regulations into effect, it would affect.
Well, would it or would it not, or would people just do it, and what's the repercussions that they might have? I mean, we can have regulations in place, just to people come in. But I think
You could also
doing something like
explore
this
some sort of
might
like,
address the long-term character of the neighborhood. Because I do feel bad for those options that I want.
I was gonna say like this is something you consider just for that particular event. You could explore some sort of permit just for
So what you're saying is that we go ahead and regulate however we're gonna regulate, but then maybe in 2026 come up with a World Cup exclusion to the rules. So here's a question, not to belabor this any longer, because clearly great answers are eluding us. But is there any sort of belief that the World Cup is leading, like some of the acquiring these properties is in anticipation of the World Cup?
Yes.
Okay, so then the World Cup really is an issue, is my point. Because if the World Cup is creating some of the situation, and I don't know how to prove that, but if the World Cup is creating some of this situation, then that is relevant. Because people might be buying them to sit on them or to just kind of nurse them along weekend, for the big bang, which is, from at least from what we're being told, is people staying for a month and a half, 2 months, and making $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 over 2 months, which would pay most people's house payments.
So what happens the day after the World Cup?
You will leave.
They leave
And these houses just go back to being regular residential?
well, they would go back to being regulated as they were regulated the day before the World Cup came, right? I mean,
Well, my point is that we're trying to solve this for the World Cup.
I don't know.
What happens when the World Cup's over?
Sure. Well, I
And
think
is the World Cup, time will take care of the World Cup issue.
I think what I'm hearing is everybody is more attuned with you maybe than you believe. That I think there is the integrity of the neighborhood issue. I think there is that this is a single family and we should know our neighbors but a lot of those are shoulds, and maybe should isn't the world we live in anymore. But yeah, I think we regulate for that in anticipation of the World Cup. Right? I don't think we go around the World Cup, but we need to be aware that the World Cup might be driving some of what we're seeing now. So I don't have a great answer for anybody. Does anybody want us staff to do anything on this?
I want to add one thing because I'm very remiss not to say something. If we want to talk about starter homes and affordability of homes, we need to address the single family landlord issue. There are 27 times more single family rentals or long-term rentals than there are short-term rentals. So if you want to talk about people being able to buy and live in Merriam, that's a bigger problem with short-term rentals.
So having this conversation is like.
We're doing this all, I mean, granted, all 18 of these single-family homes that are being rented as short-term rentals are affecting a lot of people who live around them. I get that. But when we talk about people buying homes and living in Merriam and being good neighbors with skin in the game and owning a home, that number is 27 times larger than the number of short-term rentals, for perspective.
We heard a lot about that in DC.
But those people live there for a year,
Maybe.
right?
Maybe.
So they have opportunity to be neighbors.
Also, you can't force someone to just like leave. Because you're just assuming that there's like people are people you can't control.
We don't make those owners live within 50 miles. I just think, just to put it in perspective with all the other problems that short-term rentals bring, I think it's also a problem.
I know when I talk about that, I remember to work for this is what we're talking about right now.
Jason, what do you want to do? What's the solution?
I like the idea of the 1,000 foot. And I like the idea of increasing the license fee. I'm with Stacy, I think we need to take the World Cup into consideration, but I also see this as a long-term problem, if you see it as a problem. I think we need to regulate it based on the long term, with the short term.
And from your perspective, that is licensing and 1,000-foot buffer. I mean, at least that's step one.
Yeah. I mean, I've lived in neighborhoods with long-term rentals, and you get to know your neighbors, they're good neighbors, and they leave after a year, and it's sad. But think with these short terms, like, you have to take a little bit more, you need to be a little bit more cautious about how they pop up, because I think, because so many people are coming and going, even though we do expect it, I think the potential of the property, becoming a nuisance or even being run down is a problem that can affect the neighbors that are close by. So I think the 1,000-foot and the fee will help with that and help take that into consideration for the long term.
Andy, what are your thoughts? What's the solution? Is there a solution?
I do like buffer zone. That's not a really
Licensing, do you mean, do you think it should be, do you think we should permit it, should have some sort of fee, some sort of regulated in that way?
yeah.
Is that something that you would support, or at least you would consider if staff was to bring that back to the council? It would make sense, at least to think. Mayor? Just wave your magic wand, make it all go away.
Yeah, I actually see both sides of this, and I actually love this. But I think you have to, from an integrity standpoint, have to go some sort of buffer. Not make our whole city SDRs. I would disagree a little bit with what Eddie referenced to rental properties can be long-term down there, people never thought that they'd go out, but also, it serves for a function that they don't have the money to buy a house, but they have enough money to afford to rent. So, there are a lot of people who live in those conditions. So, wow, but you want to stay. So, I don't think short-term is long-term. But I am interested in figuring out, though, I didn't see anything in your initial proposal or something that I didn't think we could enforce. I was kind of buying into what we were proposing. We wouldn't propose it, we didn't think we could. Right. So I thought that was good. I am curious, though, how we regulate. I know we have regulations governing noise ordinances and things like that. Who do we go after? I mean, if it's a code violation, obviously, you go after the owner of the property. But if somebody is a short-term rental, it's just big, but for the chief, which way on that? How do we go after that? And is there any ramifications for the potential health problem?
Yes and no, it depends on a bunch of stuff. Here's your problem with, yes, we can enforce all the ordinances that are violated with the person that's renting the property. Issue is, especially if you're talking about the people from the World Cup, if they're from Germany, they ain't coming to court. I can issue them all the tickets they want. They're on a plane in 30 days. Their court date ain't gonna, and I'm not going to Germany to get them. Even if they're out of state, it's a misdemeanor. I'm not going out of state to pick them up. It's not extraditable. So what we can do and what we will do is whatever the violation is, we will shut it down as best we can. And if it's an arrestable offense, we can arrest them. But long-term enforcement of those with short-term rentals, the people who are actually causing the issues is probably not a realistic expectation to solve things. Going after the property owner, that depends on how the ordinances are written as far as promoting nuisances. But we've got hotels that I'm going to a lot more than I'm going to short-term rentals or long-term rentals. We're not doing anything with the ownership of the hotels because it's it's not an easy task. So, I'm up at extended stay daily with issues. We don't go after the hotel owners, we go after the people causing the problem. So it's a complicated question, it's a complicated answer.
But we shut it down. I mean, for the sake of the disruption in the neighborhood, which is what is the complaint, we, assuming that they're called.
Yeah.
Assuming that they do what they say they do, they're shutting it down. So, again, already regulated.
Yeah, we'll add that when we get notification of those things, we do, we talk about it. We'll let that be you. Not good for you or anybody else. We also talk about actual property owners in those situations. We know, we've heard, we need to put
Stacy, what do you think?
I mean, I think you guys are going to like, I don't know that I have a magic wand that gives us the answer. I voiced my concerns that I heard from my residents, and I don't really agree with the 1,000-foot buffer. I think it would fix the problem that I'm hearing about in Ward 4. I'm trying to speak from the residents' point of mind, not my personal opinion, which is hard. So, I don't think rentals are inherently a bad problem. I think when we have such a saturation like we do by people that don't live in our community, it's hard. And I don't have to just well, wasn't the right answer, and so I don't know that we do anything, I guess.
So if we regulate 1,000 foot's maybe not the best option, but you think something needs to do, we just don't exactly know what.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think
Yeah,
any of the
I don't think any of us do.
I don't think any of the cities that have put, I don't think it's a larger issue, I think, than cities can, like, when Airbnb and VRBO would be mandated to report to cities. I mean, they give us tax bill that are on there, but like, I feel like there should be more regulations where it isn't something we can fix. So that's my 2 cents.
I think it was pretty clear what, the 1,000-foot buffer, I think it's an unfair push market monopoly. I agree it would fix the problem, it's don't think it's the right tool for it, I think it's unfair. I think it takes away something from a lot of residents by capturing them in that radius. I like the idea of sending a notice to the neighbors when somebody licenses a short-term rental. I like the idea of some sort of literature on being a good neighbor and the city amenities that you can take advantage of. I'd love to see a World Cup exception that we can take up on a case-by-case basis. If something like the World Cup ever comes back, one, whatever, other international stage event that we did. And then like increase the licensing fee and maybe a little bit more direct form for repeat offenders, rather than just if you're bad enough, city council may take away your license. Some kind of, for lack of a better word, 3 strikes. I think, and then to the mayor's point, I agree that longer term residents can be good neighbors, but I do think that it has an impact on housing stock for home buyers. Those houses just aren't available for first-time buyers or second and third-time buyers. So, and I think that's not the nature of this problem, but it is a problem. I think that one captures very nicely.
Before you take all this around, I want to know what would it look like if, let's say, my neighbor then decides to rent his property as a short-term rental, and then like halfway down the block, somebody else decides they also want to. How would you regulate that? Like, would you just say, no, sorry, we can't issue this license?
Correct.
And then if they try to do it anyway, did you fine them?
we don't fine, we would cite them and then they'd have to go to court before people take that judge.
Violating any.
Just like speeding ticket, the police don't give you the fine, they just give you the ticket.
Bruce?
When this topic first came up, my initial thought was that this, any regulation of the infringement on the homeowner's right to rent their property. After a couple of conversations with some citizens, some more thought, I've come to realize that the neighbors have rights too. And this infringes on the other neighbors' rights to live in a residential neighborhood that they bought into. or moved into. So I agree with Jake, I think 1,000 foot is a first to market monopoly, and I don't really like it, but I think that's a reasonable compromise in my area.
I am 100% supportive of that. We have STRs in our city because of my family's experience of looking for a place when they had to live out their home. And had to do that for 9 months where they ended up having to move 3 or 4 different times. So, but given that, I don't want the whole city to be STRs, so I would say that I would support the 1,000 foot perimeter barrier, and then I would also think that we need to have registration fee for STRs.
Higher registration fee, like, I'm really feeling on a buffer, to be honest with you. I think that a buffer is great. But 1,000 feet in Merriam, it's 1,000 feet everywhere else, but in Merriam, 1,000 feet goes a lot further to what it does in other cities. And I think that does take away the right of people to have passive income if they want to have it in some things. And then tentatively, mostly agree with what Jacob said. I don't think that's something we need to repeat, and I do think that the actual housing affordability issue is about rental and
I have one quick thing that was mentioned. Would there be a way to add a caveat for people who fall within like 900 feet to apply for a variance?
That's kind of like saying, can people who live just across the street from Schweitzer also go to the Merriam Community Center and pay the resident rate? Remember when we were having those conversations and we were like, we have to set it, so, you know, like.
Everyone knows the pipe for very
Yeah, I mean, here would be,
You know someone's gonna get out there a little bit.
we certainly could put something together and bring back an option that is in addition to 1,000. I mean, I know more work for the code staff to do, because again, they're kind of buffering all these addresses out. This is not a very in-depth map, but we have an in-depth map that has every single parcel, every single address for this 1,000 foot buffer. We certainly could look at one that's say 500 foot and bring 1,000 and a 500 foot one, just to see what that looks like. Because again, we're not deciding anything tonight, right? We don't make policy in work session, we discuss policy. We will come back and present something to council and let council chew on it and debate it at that time. This is just simply to give staff an idea of what we should be thinking. I think Jason and then Bruce.
So I have a question, it lightly ties into this. So if you were running a business out of your house, you have to let your neighbors within a certain number of feet from your house.
Depends on what that business is.
Food related.
Or food.
Let's say food, like your.
Let's do an easier one. Let's do a contractor. Contract. So you're a contractor.
Well, but that doesn't go into my question. So my wife started a food business out of her house that she did for a year.
Okay.
And we had to let people within a certain number of feet from our house know that she was running a business, and she was not allowed to have customers come to the house.
That is so, we have 2 different types of occupations, type 1, type 2.
Okay.
You all have approved this. Type, the home occupation, you want customers coming to it, or you're gonna have employees, or you're a contractor. That is the type that you have to notify everybody within 200 foot buffer zone. And then they have the opportunity to, write to me if they have any concerns about it. They do not have the opportunity to veto it. That's the thing folks need to understand. That's the thing we complain to explain to them is, you do not, a single resident does not have the opportunity or the ability to say, hey, I don't like it.
So my question, going into my question, not allowing customers to come to the house.
That is not So there is a limit on the number of people that can come and go to that type of home occupation. So.
But my question is, what's the reasoning by the city? And what I'm trying to get to is it to protect the feel of the neighborhood? Is it to protect the neighbors from, what I'm trying to do is tie it into like, people's right to, run a business out of the house, renting their house, right? And having people coming to it on a regular basis. How is that similar or dissimilar to running that type of business that we just discussed out of your house and having people come teach it?
So this argument is very similar to the same argument you all had during home occupancy when we did home occupations. It's a very similar argument. It's very much the trying to balance those rights as a property owner, the bundle of rights they get with the balance that with the overall neighborhood. Person who moves there, their expectation is to move into a residential neighborhood, not a neighborhood where a contractor has lots of contracting activity and big trucks and stuff coming and going. So this is the exact same conversation. This is exactly what's going on here. Is that some folks, I think the first comments call things like that. Individual moves into to look up the zoning. Some people do this. They look at a house. They look at the house. Hey, it's zoned R1. That's residential. What's the rest of the area? It's zoned R1. It's residential as well. My expectation is it's going to be single family activity, single family residential activity there. So they move in. So their expectation is it's residential. So you're trying to balance that to the person who bought a house and now wants to do a home occupation. That's wants to do a higher level or a higher density. Right. This is very much the same conversation that you all had.
So my point was that we already are kind of taking neighbors into account when it comes to certain businesses, and I think that can extend to these short-term rentals. And I know like there's a business run out of the house in my ward, a neighborhood that has had some issues, and the city's work with them, and I think possibly the police have worked with them to try to ease the burden on the neighbors. So it's something that the city's already kind of dealing with, and I think dealing with well. And I don't think it'll be difficult for the city to extend it to these short-term rentals.
I'm just commenting from here when I look at the map. If we had 1,000-foot rule in place and take out the apartments, and there's probably about 15 or 16.
Say that again.
If you look at the 1,000-foot circles, you put them all on the map and nothing overlapped, we could probably fit about 15 or 16 short-term rentals into Merriam.
More of them than what's out here?
No,
Starting
I'm
from
just, you
scratch.
took the circles and you spread them out to where nothing connected.
I got you.
And you put it on the residential, took out the apartments, took out the hospital. There's probably gonna be about 14 to 16 circles that would fit. And maybe that's something that you can do as we talk about, is 1,000 feet right, is 500 feet right? How many short-term rentals should Merriam have? Maximum. Is it 15, is it 30, is it 5?
Well,
How many circles do we want?
That's going to be, if that's the data that you need to make that decision, it's your decision to make.
The red-blooded capitalists would argue it should have as many as the market.
Well, I get that.
So something, when do you think it changes the character of the nature?
When does it change the character of the nature of the
Well,
neighborhood?
I think what we're saying is 1 for every 1,000 foot is what we're.
And what would that look like? What's the maximum number that would fit in Merriam, 1 per 1,000 foot?
We certainly could lay some circles over and figure out what that looks like,
Yeah.
just so we can come up with a number. So it sounds to me like what we're gonna do is we're gonna put together a little bit more detailed plan reflective of some of the conversation that we've heard here as it relates to permitting, fees for permitting, buffer, whether that's 1,000 foot or 500 foot, kind of what the penalty is, whether that's a 3 strikes, or how exactly we would go about that, or how we would regulate the punitive part of violating that, and then we'll bring back to the council for some additional discussion, hopefully something that is maybe a little bit more narrowed down and we can chew on, and our residents can weigh in on and share with us their additional comments for or against whatever it is that we decide to move forward. Or the alternative is we walk out of here, we all go home, we don't do anything. Is that an option?
No.
So that's what we'll do.
If I rent my house for the 29 days for the World Cup, none of this applies.
Yeah, it's 27.
So if I rent for 29, it's all, I can get like a landlord license, but short-term rental wise, it's all new.
That's correct.
Can I get a little?
Well, that question, not that I've been 3 people coming in with it.
Okay, well, appreciate everybody's good conversation and staying up late with us.
Yes, thank you much.
We'll get something and bring it back to council here in a few weeks.
My first rodeo, right?
Yeah.